Our scripture reading today is found in John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from Scripture that Jesus had to raise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned around, she turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. This is the word of the Lord. Please be seated.
Please be seated. Amen. Hey, good morning, everyone. In the history of the church would actually say aloud on this Easter morning, they would say, "He is risen," and the people would respond, "He is risen indeed." So let's try that together. He is risen. That's right. Now try it while high-fiving your neighbor. He is risen. That's right. Yes. Now, here's the thing, the stunning thing about the Christian story is that it's not simply some kind of made up myth that we believe in. It's actually based on this historical person named Jesus who really lived, who really died, and who really resurrected from the grave. And so the earliest Christian manuscripts and throughout history, you see that the Christian story is really based on these 3 days. It's Good Friday, which is a day that we commemorate the death of Jesus. And we believe that Jesus died for us out of willing and loving sacrifice for us. Then there's Saturday, this day where, could you imagine, you're one of the disciples, you follow Jesus, you're thinking that Jesus is going to be the one that's going to deliver you from Rome and from oppression and going to set you free. And then there's Saturday where there's this confusion of like, Jesus is dead. And what in the world were we putting our hope in? And then, of course, Sunday comes, and this is the third day where Jesus resurrects from the grave and changes everything. And it's really the reason why here I am, this Korean American kid I'm not a kid anymore, but nonetheless, this Korean American who grew up in Los Angeles, moved here in 2001, have been here for 24 years, and here I am standing in the front of this school in the Upper West Side of Manhattan, speaking to a group of people, telling you the same news, that Jesus is actually alive. I mean, that's kind of a stunning story for us to be seated here right now and to be reflecting on this story. And in many ways, we're going to be looking at one of the historical accounts of an eyewitness account of someone who was there, who witnessed the resurrected Jesus. And so as we look at this story, could imagine that we're in this scene where, again, there's Holy Saturday, this day of waiting, and Jesus is dead. And you're wondering like, oh my goodness, what in the world is going to happen? And it brings us to this story where we see that one of the gospel writers, his name is John, who's one of Jesus' disciples. Look, he writes his eyewitness account. Check this out. Look what it says. It says, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance, which is already a Herculean task for a large stone that weighed several hundred pounds. Some estimate even a ton, like to actually move it out of the way of this tomb. So you got to understand, moving has removed this stone from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter. I love how these notes of people's names. Hey, here are the receipts. If you want to know what really happened, talk to Simon Peter. Talk to Mary Magdalene. Look what he says. And the other disciple, the one Jesus loved. Now, here's the thing about John. One of the things is John is writing this, and he references himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. So just so you know, he probably did write this if this is what he's writing about himself, right? And look at what happens, right? Mary says to them, says, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb. Now, who are the they? We don't know. Neither there's Mary. All she knows is she sees an empty tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. So Peter and the other disciple, again, the one that Jesus loved, started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter. I mean, don't you love this little clue here, this little note, this little historical detail? Again, yet another sign that this was written by a real person who's reflecting on these real events. And by the way, John won the race and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. So you see what happened? So John is basically giving this eyewitness account. He's basically saying, I outran Peter. I got here. I looked and I saw strips of linen lying there. Now, here's what's interesting. The way that people would be encased after they died, some estimate that they would actually wear about 75 pounds worth of encasing as they were entombed. So could you imagine then these strips of linen then are just lying there? Then Simon Peter came along behind him, so slow, and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first, that's John, also went inside. He saw and believed. Now, we don't quite know what he believed, because check out this sentence that follows what he says after he says he saw and believed. They still did not understand. Like, this is not, it's not computing to them what in the world is going on, because all they see is an empty tomb, the stone rolled away, and they see strips of linen lying there from scriptures that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now, Mary, look at what it says, stood outside the tomb crying. And John gets this from the eyewitness account of Mary. Outside the tomb crying, as she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white, sealed where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and other at the foot. Now, what a startling moment, right? She sees two people. She had no idea who they are. And they asked her, woman, why are you crying? And look at what she says. She says, they have taken my Lord away. This is the second time she mentions this. She's like, someone has taken the body. It's the only thing that makes logical sense right now. That's why she would say that to the disciples, and they would come running around to see the tomb. But also, she now says this to the angels. They have taken my Lord away, she said, and I don't know where they've put him. At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize, in the same way that the disciples did not really understand what Jesus was talking about when he's talking about his resurrection, she didn't realize that it was Jesus. Now, some of us might be like, oh my goodness, how could you not realize it was Jesus? That's Jesus. Didn't you spend all this time with him? See, but don't you understand? This is a historical account. Like, no one has ever predicted their death and resurrection and done it. And so the disciples, even though Jesus had been someone who talks about his death and resurrection, like the disciples, they had no grid for this. Like, who in the world is going to do that? So when Mary on this Sunday morning, she goes and she sees the empty tomb, the stone rolled away. The only logical conclusion, especially for us as rational New Yorkers, I mean, we would think the same, right? Like someone took the body. I don't know who did this, but this heinous act, we need to solve this murder mystery now. I mean, that's essentially what Mary is doing. She's like, someone took the body. We need to discover this. Angels say, why are you crying? And she basically says, someone took the body. If you took it, please tell us. She doesn't realize, though, that Jesus is standing behind her. Now, why is it that Mary actually responds this way? Why? It's because it's the only thing that makes logical sense. Like, she doesn't come with this preconceived notion, oh, yes, that Jesus is going to resurrect from the grave and appear behind her. She just has this, she's so confused. She's just basically like, someone took the body. That's the only logical explanation. And now, why does she respond this way? This is a historical account. Why? It's because the resurrection, it really does defy our paradigms. It defies Mary's paradigms. It defies John and Peter and anyone else. All of our paradigms, like, wait a minute, none of us are really expecting the resurrection here. Like, it makes logical sense that Mary would be like, where has the body been taken? Why? Because resurrection is this stunning moment where, like, wait a minute, that's not our most natural inclination when we see an empty tomb. Now, Thomas Kuhn in the 1960s wrote this very seminal book. Thomas Kuhn is a philosopher. He wrote this book, and it was called The Revolution or The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And I remember reading this book in university, and Thomas Kuhn, he actually outlines that the way that science actually works is, first, we build a paradigm around kind of our scientific assumptions and our worldview and anything that fits within that grid of science. And then what happens, though, is these anomalies come to threaten that whole worldview. And these anomalies come out, and we wonder, like, wait a minute, how does that fit within the worldview that we've created? And because of those anomalies, this kind of crisis ends up burgeoning this new kind of way of viewing and approaching science. And that's how a scientific revolution begins. These anomalies that break up paradigms, and then all of a sudden, there's an entirely new paradigm when it comes to science. So one of the revolutions, the scientific revolutions that Thomas Kuhn talks about, is actually the revolution that happened with, in the early first and second century. Ptolemy had introduced this way of viewing the world and the universe when it comes to astronomy. And it was basically the geocentric model of the world. Well, basically, it's, yes, everything revolves around the Earth. And so if you think about it, for more than 1,500 years, people believed that everything kind of centered around the Earth. And if we go to the next slide, if you see this, the normal science, right? So there's this moment, right? There's this Ptolemaic kind of approach to science, and astronomers, mathematicians, some of the brightest minds, the way they approach science and their understanding of the universe was, yes, of course, it's a geocentric model. But what ends up happening, predictions start going a little bit askew. Some of the formulas that some of these early scientists and astrologers and astronomers would devise, like some of the mathematical formulas didn't start to make sense. And so the model begins to drift a little bit, and then all of a sudden there's a model crisis. There's this moment where there are too many anomalies. Our predictions are way off. Math is not mathing right. And so here's what ends up happening. Copernicus comes and he posits in the 16th century, he posits this view that maybe it's not a geocentric model of the world and the universe, but it's a heliocentric one. The sun, what if the sun is the center of the solar system? Now, Galileo and Kepler and other scientists would actually start to confirm this view of a heliocentric model, and thus began a Copernican revolution. That's where we get this phrase from, a Copernican revolution. For over 1,500 years, people approach life and the universe in such a way that, yes, of course, it's common knowledge that everything revolves around the Earth. And here Copernicus is, and it's like, I don't know. And the anomalies that occur end up birthing a brand new paradigm. And what Kuhn outlines is that whenever it comes to different scientific advancements, what happens is there's this paradigm that people live by, but these anomalies that change that paradigm, and then a brand new revolution comes about. And in many ways, the same is true with this resurrection. I mean, could you imagine? Because this is what Mary's doing. She's living under this old paradigm, and this anomaly has just happened. She's not aware of it. Who can blame her? I would respond the same way. I'd be like, yo, who took this body? Did you guys snatch this body? Who moved this stone? We're all playing murder mystery here. And meanwhile, Jesus is right behind Mary. Now, here's the thing. What are some of the reasons to actually believe in the resurrection then? right? Like what are some of the signs that this really did happen? Because if this is an anomaly that's worth believing in, that would revolutionize our perspective on the world, why do Christians throughout centuries and even today, for me, like I said, to be standing up here talking about the resurrected Jesus, like why in the world do we believe this? Here are some reasons. First, there's the eyewitness accounts of Jesus, multiple eyewitness accounts, not only from John, not only from Mary. Historians have researched and talked about how the historical Jesus was a real person. The Apostle Paul later talks about how Jesus appeared to 500 different people. There's all these names of people that they were part of the historical record and gave these eyewitness accounts that Jesus really resurrected from the grave. Number two is there's an empty tomb. Throughout history, no one has been able to say, like, hey, you know what? You guys are all jokers here. You believe that Jesus is alive, but hey, here's the tomb where we found Jesus's body. There it is. Still hasn't come up. The tomb is still empty. Number three, the transformation of the disciples. These disciples went from being what was called in the book of Acts unschooled, ordinary people, unimpressive in terms of the world's standards. They were from kind of an oppressed minority group. Most of them had very kind of like blue collar jobs like fishermen. And yet the disciples end up encountering this radical transformation, and they would upend the world and change human history forever. And the scriptures tell us these people, they were unschooled and ordinary people, and yet somehow, like, we sit in this room talking about courageous moments of their own transformation. Now, why were they transformed? They went from this scared bunch who were worried about Rome and what would happen to all of a sudden leading a revolution in the midst of persecution and difficulty. Two of the people who are mentioned as disciples is the Apostle Paul. Paul was one of the most ardent persecutors of Christians. In fact, as a Jewish Pharisee, he was so against the Christian movement. He was there trying to bring people to die for saying they believed in Jesus. And what happens? Jesus meets Paul so profoundly, and Paul goes from being this ardent antagonist against Christians and against the Christian movement to all of a sudden, Paul ends up becoming someone who's willing to die for his faith. I mean, that is a stunning transformation. Another stunning transformation is James. James is the brother of Jesus. For those of you with siblings here, imagine if your sibling came to you and said, I'm the son of God. You're like, I know we're all sons of God, we're all daughters of God, like, no, I'm God. I'm like, I was there before creation began. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine how you would respond to your sibling if they said or did that? I mean, and but James and other siblings of Jesus and Mary and others, his family actually also say that he is Lord and God, and they follow Jesus. Now, that's another stunning example of a disciple. Now, no one would dare to make that kind of switch or change and be willing to die for something that they believed or thought was a lie. And yet we have the eyewitness accounts, and we have these disciples who encounter this radical transformation, including people like Paul, including people like James, who's the brother of Jesus. And not only that, the expansion of the early church despite being a persecuted minority. The early church, in the midst of persecution and bloodshed, dying for their faith, their families dying for their faith, they would actually encounter such a transformative experience by being eyewitnesses to the resurrection. It would forever change their lives. Now, this wasn't just for like, oh, it changed their lives and they went through some suffering for a few years. They went through suffering as a persecuted minority for more than 300 years. And still the Christian movement began to grow. Now, how in the world would it grow when honestly the greatest military might, the powers of the world are telling Christians they're crazy? They're ridiculous? How could you believe this? And yet, the Christian movement grows against all odds. Now, these are all different historical clues as to, again, this paradigm changing. No one would believe that Jesus resurrected, but all of these little moments are clues that Jesus, perhaps he really did rise again. Craig Keener, who's a scholar, he actually wrote a book called Miracles Today. And in his books, in his book, he actually talks about his own, not only his own transformation, because he grew up as an atheist and came to this real kind of philosophical conundrum about the immaterial world and faith and purpose, and ends up having this radical conversion. After he has this radical conversion of following Jesus, and again, as a scholar and a historian, he realizes that miracles, believing in miracles and healings and ways that God intervenes in the world is really important. And so what he ends up doing, he actually marries a Congolese scholar, and she also believes in the supernatural work of God in various ways. And both of them, as scholars, believe this. And so he actually writes this book, and he accounts for over 1,000 different miracles around the world that people believe in. These moments that go beyond kind of the normal rhythms and regular patterns that we see in life, especially around healings and miracles like that. And he actually outlines how, especially in the West, one of the reasons why we have become, when our paradigm, when it comes to whether God can move or intervene supernaturally, it's often been shaped by a Scottish philosopher named David Hume in the 18th century. In the 18th century, David Hume talked about how the natural world, the grid by which we view the world, it's viewed by by science and the ways that things happen according to natural patterns. And what Keener actually argues is that the reason why we tend to not believe in miracles, especially in the West, and supernatural kind of intervention, is essentially because we actually, it was a circular argument. We basically believe that, oh yeah, of course miracles can't happen, and that's why we don't believe that miracles can happen. And yet, throughout the world, in Asia and in the global South especially, there are tons of eyewitness accounts of people encountering and discovering miracles and healings. In fact, he cites one study that he talked in a study that was done of Western doctors. They were asked, do you believe that somehow some people can get healed outside of the ways of modern medicine, and somehow there are these moments that are outside of the natural patterns of health? And 75% of doctors replied yes. 50% of the doctors replied that they had witnessed something like that. When the normal patterns of health and the ways that they had been trained to diagnose certain issues and problems, that somehow there were moments that went outside those patterns and people had experienced something extraordinary. Now, again, like, there are these patterns of abnormality. As Christians, we would say God works in these supernatural ways. And the resurrection is actually this event that our whole faith hinges on this. That's why the Apostle Paul would actually say, listen, if the resurrection did not happen, we are the most pitied of all people. Like, why in the world are we doing this? And Paul himself is saying this while he's writing, being persecuted. He's actually going to die for his faith. And he basically says, listen, the logical argument I want to give you, if this thing never happened, if the resurrection never happened, well, listen, I am wasting my life. And he's making this argument that the resurrection really did happen. Now, Mary doesn't know it though, because she's still this, it's outside of her paradigm. She's like, listen, somebody snatched this body. Who did this? See, but a moment is about to change in her life and in human history forever. But you and I, we have these moments as well, these moments of encounter that, like, if I were to ask you, have you had these moments in your life where like something did not fit and it was out of the ordinary and it changed, and your memory has, and your consciousness is stirred to a point where like you're like, yeah, I remember that moment. Now, if you were to ask me like, hey Drew, what did you have for lunch on Tuesday? I'd be like, I don't know, probably Chick-fil-A, because we live next to Chick-fil-A. But I don't know for sure. Why? Because it was just kind of an ordinary kind of lunch. But there are these moments in your life and in mine where these moments of just heightened awareness of like, oh man, do you remember when this happened in your life? I know for me, one of those moments was 9/11. I had actually just moved to New York City September 5th, 2001. And I know that because my birthday, along with my twin brothers, is September 6th, 2001. And he moved here for law school. I moved here to intern at a church community. And I just remember a few days later when on 9/11, I remember I was crashing in Forest Hills with three people that I had just met. And I was looking for housing, didn't know where I was going to live. So I remember getting up early that morning after being on the couch. And I remember walking up 71st Street Continental on the morning of 9/11. And I remember kind of peering into the Radio Shack, the same Radio Shack where I got my phone, my first cell phone ever. Uh, I'm old. Anyhow, but I remember peering in, and I see people huddled around the television screens in the Radio Shack. I'm like, "Oh my goodness, what's going on?" So I walk into the Radio Shack, I'm like, "What's going on?" And I could see the World Trade Center, only one tower was on fire at that point. We just and it was just I was so stunned, I didn't know what was happening, and the commentators were talking about maybe it was a bomb or something, we don't know what it was, and I just remember talking to people, I'm like, "Is this real? Is this a movie?" And they're like, "No, this is really happening right now." I remember leaving that Radio Shack, running back to my apartment in Forest Hills, trying to call my brother was in law school at the time at NYU. I'm trying to call him, and all the phone lines are down, they're dead, and I'm just racing back home to this place. It's just seared into my memory. I imagine the same is true for you, like a catastrophic event like 9/11. Like, if I were to ask if you were alive back then and like, if someone were to ask, "Where were you at 9/11?" Most of us would have some sort of memory of when we first heard the news. Another moment that I thought of was last year, Simone Curbelo, who's one of our most, she was a beloved member of our church. She was one of, the founding members of our church in Manhattan, and she was invited to our church by her cousin who was part of our church in Queens. So when we were starting this church in Manhattan, she took part in it. One of the most kind of vivacious personalities, Simone was. And she got baptized in our church community, came to faith. She was raising her son as a single mom, and just this beautiful soul. She also worked in theater and in all sorts of other kinds of ways in the city. And I remember last year we were on our winter break, and we were spending time with Tina's family. So we're 2 hours behind. And I remember getting a voicemail from this unknown number, but I could read the text. It said something to Drew. So I was like, okay, it's a personal phone. But I woke up the next morning, early in the morning, I called the number back, and it was Simone's sister who told us that she had just had an aneurysm. I remember being so crushed. And because just a couple months earlier, we were on a retreat, and I had personally asked her to share her story of her own transformation of faith, as well as like what this church community had meant for her. And she shared the most lovely testimony at our church retreat about how God had met her in this significant way and how we had become a family for her. And here she was now. She had this aneurysm, and her sister told me that she has a very minimal chance to live. I remember after hanging up the phone with her, I just remember feeling so helpless, and I just remember crying. And it was early in the morning in the Midwest, and I was just weeping thinking about her and her life. She ended up passing away a month later. And we ended up having a beautiful funeral for her. But I'm thinking about, again, I remember exactly where I was when I got the phone call. I remember kind of sobbing alone in the early morning. Now, but it's not only these moments, these catastrophic moments like 9/11 or the passing or the illness of people that we love. There's also moments of joy, right, that we remember. Um, I was thinking of what are moments of joy that are kind of like that my consciousness was perked up, and I thought about the birth of my children, David and Avery. You know what's crazy is that when it comes to, like, the birth of our kids, like, I don't after their birth until they were about 5, I don't remember anything. Any parents know what I'm talking about? Like, I don't remember any of those days. Yeah, yeah. But what's amazing is that I remember, uh, when David was born, actually before he was born, Tina, for whatever reason, she stayed up all night, and she started to clean up our apartment. And then she takes this late night shower, and she kind of, like, freshens up, and then she wakes me up at 3 AM or something like that. She wakes me up, she's like, "We need to go to the hospital." I'm like, "Oh, what's going on?" And, "You look so good right now," like, she had just freshened up, and she's just like, "I just know I could like, my body, I think we're ready." And I remember rushing off to the hospital, and when David was born. And I remember the same for Avery, our second. We had a miscarriage in between David and Avery, which was a painful moment, but I remember, like, we ended up David was a little toddler at the time, so we're trying to plan out kind of where he was gonna be. I remember he was wearing this orange striped shirt and, these blue pants, and, uh, we we remembered that, like, Tina got really hungry after she gave birth, so we, packed I remember just having, like I was so ready with all these granola bars, guys, and, I remember when Avery was born. Again, I don't remember much between ages 1 to 5, but nonetheless, something about their birth. It's interesting, right? There's these moments of catastrophic loss or suffering or death or love and joy that, like, it's kind of, like, implanted in our minds and consciousness that bring to surface these moments, that these life-changing moments, and you've probably had those moments too. And for Mary, there's this moment that's coming, right? There's this confusion, this disorientation of what's going on in my life and what's going on in the world right now. And little does Mary know that her paradigms are being shifted. And the question for you and for me when it comes to the resurrection is, has the resurrection defied your paradigms? Has it reached a level of consciousness for you where you're like, oh my goodness, this thing really happened? It's really happened. And there's a case that Jesus is alive. That's right. Hallelujah. And has it defied your paradigms? But here's the second question. Not only has it defied your paradigms, but it's this. Has the resurrection, has it started a revolution in your life? Has it not only defied paradigms, but has it started like this anomaly has happened, and now has it started a revolution in your life? Has it changed the way that now you fundamentally see the world? Has it become something that now, in your moments of greatest joy and your moments of greatest crisis, in your moments as you're walking along the street down Amsterdam Avenue, in the moments when you're grieving with someone that you love, in the moments when you're celebrating a milestone in your life, in the everyday moments of your life, has the resurrection, has it begun to revolutionize your life and mine? Has it changed fundamentally? Has it given you a kind of hope and a kind of joy and a kind of peace that you've always longed for? And maybe what if today you've come into this room and you realize, yeah, I'm lacking in peace, I'm lacking in joy, I'm lacking. And whether you've heard this for the thousandth time or whether you're hearing this for the first time, the question is, has it revolutionized your life? Has the reality of the resurrection, has it come to you? Has it come to your consciousness in such a manner that whatever you're going through in life, the inevitable ups and downs that we all go through with our families, we all go through with suffering and pain and joy and loss. Has the reality of the resurrected Jesus, has it revolutionized your life? Has it fundamentally changed the way that you want to do relationships now? The way that you want to do marriage, the way that you want to do singleness, the way you want to handle your money, the way you want to be in community, the way you want to forgive, the way you want to love, the way you want to experience peace. Has it revolutionized your life? Karl Marx famously once said, religion and Christianity is the opiate of the people. It's the opiate of the masses. So many people get so caught up in religion that they end up getting intoxicated with something that leads to their demise. Here's what Tim Keller says. He says, Christianity is by no means the opiate of the people. It's more like the smelling salts. It's those moments where we're awakened to a reality that's bigger than us. A truth that is meant to guide and govern us in the best of times and in the worst of times. The question is, has the resurrection, has it revolutionized your life? Has the resurrection revolutionized my life? What's interesting is, so what is it, right? Because we stopped the story where Mary still doesn't realize that it's Jesus standing behind her. Look at what it says. When does the revolution start for Mary? When does she come to this place of consciousness of like, oh snap, this is really happening? Look at what happens. It says, he asked her, this is Jesus, who's standing behind her. He says, woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for? Thinking he was the gardener, she said, Sir, if you've carried him away, if you're the one that's carried him away. This is the third time, again, her logical conclusion. Her paradigm is based like, someone snatched this body. If you're the one that took him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him. Notice what comes next. Jesus said to her, Mary. He calls her name, and she turns toward him, and she cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. It's this beautiful, tender moment where, yeah, the reality of the resurrection has happened, but the moment that it comes to her consciousness and she realizes what's happened. It's when he calls her name, Mary. Yes, Jesus is all powerful and resurrects from the grave. But Jesus is also all loving, and he knows your name. He says, JC, Brian, Paul, Stacy, Chuck. Some of you are like, is he really going to go around the whole room? I'm not. Don't worry. Don't worry. You're like, this sermon, we're already, well, is that ice cream truck happening? Kate, Annie, Shirley, Danny. You know, there's something about being known. A few months ago, I was invited to this one pastor's gathering, and it was called this family reunion. A friend invited me to this thing, and I was like, oh, should I go? And Tina's like, yeah, it'd be good to get out of your normal rhythms. And so I went to this thing that was called like a family reunion, but it was in Atlanta. And then they sent out like the roster of people that are going to this thing. And I looked at the roster and I realized I didn't know, I barely knew people there. And so like I was like super anxious. Have you ever been to like a party where you were like, you don't know anyone there? So I remember I show up at this family thing, but it's supposed to be like this party and this way of encouraging pastors, but I don't know anyone there. So here I am. I go to this thing and I'm basically like, "Oh, I don't." And like as I walk in, you see people like hugging and talking, and there's a vibe to this place. But then there's this like really kind of daunting, dooming feeling of like, I don't know anyone here. And so as people are hugging and stuff, I just think, I need to go get some snacks, like just get to the snack table. Whatever I can do, get to the snack table. So I get to the snack table, and there I am, just kind of munching along and finding some water. And then I saw someone that I knew, and he waves at me. His name's Todd. He's like, Drew. I was like, Todd. And he was talking to somebody, and he brings over this guy to talk to me. And I'm like, hey, Todd, it was so good to see you, man. And he says to me, he goes, man, I'm so glad you're here. And then he turns to the person that he's with and he's like, Drew is a pastor in New York City. He's one of the coolest pastors that I know. And I was like, tell him, keep telling him, keep talking to him, keep telling him. There's something about being known. What if the reality of the resurrection is for you today? to lift your spirits, to give you a hope, to give you a faith, to give you a purpose that the world can't give you and the world can't take away. And he says your name, each one of you. He knows your name. He says your name.